Hello and welcome to another conversation about conversations. I am your co-host Jakub Kubrak, and with me as always is the man, the myth, the legend, Ivan Farber. And today we have a special guest, Jules Swisher, a legend in her own mind.
Thank you, Jacob. I like the woman, the myth, the legend.
Ooh.
It doesn't have quite the same ring, but we're all about gender equality here. So
Absolutely. The woman, the myth, the legend, Jules Swisher.
We're like legends all around here.
Anybody that gets on the podcast is legendary.
Oh, that's good. I like that.
we're also very humble. So
Would both of you like to know what we're going to be talking about today?
Yes, please.
Well, this is the third in a multi-part series called Peeling the Pomegranate. Today's episode is part 3.
Exciting.
And but before we do that, let's get a word from our sponsors.
Absolutely. As always, for all your building needs, 503 Building. For all your reading needs and conversing needs, Conversations. How to manage your business relationship one conversation at a time. And our new sponsor, an agency in its own right, Imago Ansa. Thank you to all of our sponsors.
Yeah, thank you, Imago Ansa. It's wonderful to have a new sponsor.
Absolutely. I believe it's pronounced Imago Ansa.
Ooh, Imago Ansa. I need the phonetic spelling.
We need to do a better job for our sponsors here. We're just dropping the ball.
And before we get into any specifics, let's get to know our guest.
Sure. Jules, tell us a little bit about yourself.
yeah, so I'm Jules. I am a sales professional, as you can see here, based on my lady tie. We all came out with the ties today, so I think that's great. I wear scrubs all day, every day. I'm in medical device sales, so putting on a collared shirt with a tie really reminded me, I am a professional.
That's right.
Wearing scrubs all day and being in the hospitals really kind of just takes that street cred away of being a professional. So like I mentioned, I'm in medical device sales. I am still fairly new. I've been in the workforce for 3 or 4 years now and hopped around a little bit. Now that I'm in this sales role, I feel like I've really found my niche. So that's just a little Jules in a nutshell for you.
That's awesome. Just as a side note, they should start a company that makes scrubs with shirts and ties on, like as painted on them. That would be a good idea. I don't know.
That's a money idea. Right? I should just quit my job now and do that.
Boom. That's what we do here on Conversations About Conversations. We talk about some things, come up with ideas, and then we execute.
I love it.
One of the things that connected me to Jules was when she was interviewing for this role, we role played the interview. And that was pretty cool, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was great. That was really helpful. I had no idea what I was doing. This was my first real sales job. I was in a sales role before this, but it wasn't really sales. There was no commission. It was just different. And I called Ivan because they wanted me to present basically the product to the manager. And I was like, Mr. Farber, I have no idea what I'm doing. Please help me. And yeah, I learned a lot and ended up getting the job with no prior experience. So
yeah, it was really an honor for me to help you, as it is always to help Jacob, the people.
The people always want the help.
Yeah, we want the help. We all can use a little help from our friends.
Absolutely.
And what I recall of it, and this is pretty standard for when I coach people or give feedback, is we just start and you say, how would you approach it? And we just get right into role play. And what I recall of it was that you started by doing what most people do, which is you started presenting, right? And you're like, I can probe, I can explore, I can peel the pomegranate. And what we had to do is we did it once, you doing it the way you would just normally, and then we switched. You had me do it, and I know nothing about medical devices, but then I could demonstrate that, and then we could flip it back. And that model is the best way to learn skills and conversations in the gymnasium, if you will. Like there's always on the mat, and then there's in the gymnasium or the practice field. So, and you did great. And I was so proud of you for making that work and then thriving now, it sounds like.
Yeah. Things have just taken off, and the learning curve has been exponential. When I called you for that interview, I didn't even know what probing was. Like, I had no idea. I didn't know that I was even supposed to ask any questions. I thought I was just doing a presentation. And Mr. Farber straightened me out real quick. So thank you for that, my friend.
I will say I had a conversation with someone who's a 26-year veteran of sales and who reached out to me. One of our listeners, Jacob, another listener reaching out.
Thank you.
And he said he was stale in his approach. And we started off and I said, how do you present the company? And he went on. And then I said, well, let's switch it. And we switched it. And I started with asking questions. And Jules and I were talking about this earlier, which was having the discipline to hold back and know that the most important thing is to peel, to get to the value when you're making a sales presentation. Otherwise, you're winking in the dark. You're taking a shot at a bullseye and you have your eyes closed.
It's hard to hit someone with your eyes closed. I'm going to just take it a step back to what you talked about on the mat and off the mat. And
yes.
I think that's one of the most important things that people don't realize is they think that even like pro athletes, right, they just show up and play, but they don't realize like a Steph Curry or a Michael Jordan takes 1,000 shots before he even, warms up with the rest of the team before a game, or how many times they're in the weight room and all that stuff. And that's what practice is. That's what you got to practice, those conversations before you have them in the real world so that you can be more prepared and have a better plan. And more importantly, know how to react if you're in a tough spot, because it's the second or third time you've been there.
But in most jobs, they just hand you the phone and say, go.
Sure.
And you have no way to really observe, no way to stop making the mistakes that you were already making because you don't have the awareness. So awareness is a key thing that when I coach and mentor people, awareness is huge. But good point, Jacob. I like that point.
Yeah, and even before they give you the phone, I mean, I'm sure they're gonna have a couple conversations with you, and if those aren't right, then obviously you're not even getting the phone, right? Just like you're not gonna get on the team if you don't know how to try out and work out and all that good stuff.
So we've outlined a little bit, but let's deepen the understanding. The problem here, the problem, as I see it, and I think you both agree, is that people present instead of probe, right? They think I have to impress the prospect with the knowledge that I have, and that if they're really impressed and I say the words in the right way, they'll buy. And that's a problem. There's a lack of awareness with that. There's a lack of listening when you do that. It is not a clear approach, and it is not as effective as it could be. So that's what we're talking about here. That's what we're talking about, how to be more effective. And the key is probing. So quick review on part 1 of Peeling the Pomegranate. We talked about just the major difference between 2 types of probes, open-ended probes and closed-ended probes, and how they're used. And I certainly encourage our listeners to go back and listen to that. And Jules, you listened to part of it and then.
Oh, you're going to call me out right here, Mr. Farber?
Okay. Yes, I am.
Yes,
Call him
okay.
Ivan,
Well,
please. It's making everyone uncomfortable to hear Mr. Farber.
I listened to part of the podcast last night in bed, and I may or may not have, fallen asleep because it was night. It was 10 o'clock.
It's the sign of a good podcast.
It's the biggest compliment anybody's ever given the podcast ever.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
It's a great compliment that you listen enough that you can just relax. Anyway,
it's another reason to listen, because if you're trying to go to sleep, it's a great thing that'll put you to sleep.
Pretty much all of my podcasts that I continue to subscribe to pass that test of being able to fall asleep to the podcast.
It's kind of like Ivan's Brazilian verbal judo. It's going to put you to sleep.
Part one, open-ended, closed-ended. And open-ended questions and closed-ended questions in terms of the result that you get are as different as opening up a window and closing a window. And yet, most people, if they go beyond just presenting, what they mostly do is close the window, close the window, close the window. Do you know what I mean? Close the window. That was part one. Encourage people to listen to that. Jules, you can listen to the rest of that. Part two, though, you listen to the entire thing, and there we introduced, I think we introduced about 1/3 of the 14 different probes that I wrote about in chapter 8 of my book. And we want to expand upon that, and I think introduce all 14 of them now and go back and just kind of rap about them, see when they would be useful.
Let's wrap.
All right. So open-ended, closed-ended, open-ended, guide, and there are 9 of the 14 are open-ended. So number 1, leads. So leads is a great way to direct the conversation, and people don't do enough of this. So what is an example of a lead? A lead is simply saying, you know, what do you think about sales presentations? That leads people to talk about sales presentations. Then we talked about assessors, and assessors are a good way to assess what someone's level of understanding or comfort or just where they're coming from. So something like, how familiar are you with the different types of probes? We talked about motivator probes, like really understanding what motivates people. So I guess, Jules, in your situation, your line of work, you know, what motivates them? And we role played this back at the beginning. What motivates them to take on a new product or service, right? And you want to know that motivator because that's the button you press in order to get the sale and solve the need.
And I would add one thing too that's really helped me is understanding what motivates their practice. So oftentimes people are money motivated. They are patient. They're motivated by caring for the patient. And there's so many different types of motivators that directly controls how I'm going to sell to them.
Right. And then and we talked about this briefly, Jules, the fourth open-ended probe is called a clarifier. And certainly it's used before you clarify a question that someone's asking, but it's also really important as a clarifier to the needs that you're probing around and trying to understand. Now, this is one, Jacob, we didn't talk about on episode 2, and it's called a continuer. And it's a huge part of active listening because you want your prospect to continue. And so things like, go on, tell me more, or even just an echoing statement with a question mark. So leads, assessors, motivators, clarifiers, continuers.
And then?
And then?
That's a continuer.
Yeah, good job.
And then?
Yeah. And then?
No, and then. Sorry. Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle. A lot of movie references are going to come out of here, or at least this area of the pod. Yeah.
That area.
Metaphors and analogies.
No, and then. Yeah, no, and then. But all right, man. Yeah, and then keep going.
And then the W questions. The who, what, when, where, why, how, which is not a W, but it falls under that. This is journalist questions. And the W questions are fundamental. And what they do is they keep you away from asking the closed-ended, and we'll get to this, is the 5th of the closed-ended questions, which is helping verbs questions. But that's like the difference between did you have a good weekend versus what was your weekend like? And the difference isn't just in the question, but the difference is in the answer that you're asking for. Greasers is number 7. Those are just questions that help grease the skids for a conversation. The classic question, they're questions that people can't answer, or rather, they have to answer. So for instance, the classic one is, what do you think of the weather we're having? Like, who can't answer that? Everyone's going to answer that. And that greases the skids for probing you're going to do. So it could be something like, and Jules, you go into a clinic in Southern Oregon, you say, how long have you had this clinic? Or what brought you to this part of the world? That's a greaser. hypotheticals, like if you were to blank, what would that look like? And that's a hypothetical with an open-ended sequence. And then subdecisions is the 9th of the open-ended probes. And subdecisions are helping you in the sales process. Like if you were to buy a car today, would it be red or blue? To that kind of subdecisions. And then they're like, well, wait, I'm not ready to buy a car today. But going along the line, because to make a big decision, like to hire a company to provide medical devices, you have to know a lot of information before you say, yes, I'll sign on the dotted line.
Is there, when you put these in the book, 1 through 9 here, is there a reason you put them in the order you have them?
Yes and no.
Okay. The reason I ask this is because in a sales process, right? In a process, you're probably gonna, start off with greasers.
Yes.
Right. Right.
Yes.
So it's gonna be like, hey, what's the weather like out there? Or like, why did you end up here? Right. And then you go into all the other ones kind of in a fashion of, probably motivators or something like that after that, how does this affect you or whatever, and then the probing questions and things like that. That's why I asked. I didn't know if there was a specific sequence, but in the new book, I think that you should tailor 2 sequences, one to sales and then one to service, right? Because you can use both sequences differently or however you'd like.
You just blew my mind with that. Like the idea, the idea that I didn't have like I'm such an anal retentive guy and I have sequences for everything. So why did I not have a sequence? But they're all used in different spots.
Sure.
You would use a greaser at the beginning, but you may find that you're starting to get stuck in the middle of a conversation, or they may feel like you're being too invasive. Like one of our listeners and I talked last week about, he's like, I'm doing a good job probing, but they start to clam up. They feel like I'm digging too deep. And so sometimes a greaser is in the middle just to create levity.
I agree. I just, again, process sequences, especially, as Jules will say, right, when it comes to sales, so important. And just as a side note for the people, when you're reading the book, it might be easier if it's tailored to a salesperson or a service person or, or whatever, or at least give both options. Just thinking.
I could create a whole series, right? Yeah. Conversations for medical device salespeople. Conversations for,
available on the monthly subscription.
There you go. Now you're talking.
Comes with a pair of scrubs that has the tie printed on it. There it is.
Exactly. That's beautiful.
That was a wonderful probing question, Jacob.
In the business, that's called merch.
Merch.
And merch stands for?
Merchandise.
That's what I thought. Just wanted to make sure. There are 5 closed-ended questions. For those of you who have the book in front of you, Jacob.
And they're cheating always. Absolutely. Yeah. It's an open book test.
Page 114. Page 114 is the summary. I'm cheating too. I've got the page up on my screen right next to here. So just right there.
It's not cheating in an open book test, Ivan.
There you go.
The teacher says it's okay, so you're allowed to do that.
5 closed-ended probes, and these are just as important. And before I go on to them, one of the concepts we talked about in part 2 is that even though I'm preaching people need to use open-ended questions more because there's a virtual pandemic, overuse of, there's the word pandemic, closed-ended questions. Even though they're doing that, it's the successful combination of open and closed-ended probes that really makes the difference. It really allows you to have control over a conversation. So closed-ended questions. One.
Can we throw the word sequence in there?
Yeah, sequence.
Successful sequences and combinations of open-ended and closed-ended. Because if you just throw them, right? If you're just throwing jabs, they're not always going to land. But if you have a good sequence of jab, hook, jab, hook, and switch it up. I'm sorry, UFC was on last night, and there's just a lot of good fights. So I'm in the whole boxing UFC thing. Sequences.
Well, and that was what you did just there was you used the fourth of the five, which is an interjector. Can I throw something in there? Close-ended question, right? May I interrupt? But of course you just jump right in. You've often said to me, I'm interrupting.
I'm just trying to be polite.
Yes.
With those
so
questions.
May I interrupt? The 5 close-ended questions. 1 are confirms, very important. Did I understand you correctly? Am I hearing you right? We did talk about the second type last episode, engagers and hooks. Those are things to make sure that people are still listening to you. Are you with me? Am I going the right pace for you? Just keeping people engaged. We've already talked about helping verbs. That's actually number 5. But number 3 is what I think is one of the best ways to both create a conversation, to open a conversation, as well as to close a conversation and get the sale. And this is called an isolator. So if I had to kind of rank of the they're all of these are useful. Isolators are really important. And isolators simply start with, is there anything else blank? Is there anything else you'd like to add to the agenda? Oh, by the way, I haven't introduced this one on the podcast yet because we've been audio, not video, but the whole button your lip is like a crucial thing that my tour mentor taught me. And when my tour mentor was listening to my phone calls, he would often say, button your lip. Is there anything else that we should add to this list? Is there anything else that you need before you make a decision to purchase our service, our product?
Our TV.
Our TVs, our Tesla of TVs. All right, that's the 14. So we now have in all the episodes kind of unveiled everything that's both in chapter 2 and chapter 8 in terms of at a high level. So what do you think? Lead.
I love it. I'm a big fan. Like I said, the sequencing is the biggest, kind of cheat code, I guess, because if you don't have good sequencing in those questions, you're just throwing them all over the place. And like you said in your previous example, if you ask too many of those, probing questions too quick, people kind of clam up. So you have to build, a lot of preface to that, or whatever you want to name it, so they can open up a little bit more and have a good sequence of questions that you're going to fire off. And more importantly, listen to the answers, because a lot of the answers will lead you and help you move your sequences around.
Jules, from that role play we did back before the interview to now, like I'd be curious to know what do your conversations go like? How do they start, and how do you get in depth to get a sale?
Yeah. So I would say, kind of actually backpacking off of what Jacob said earlier, it's really important to avoid people clamming up is by skillfully listening. So that they don't feel like you're in an interrogation room, right? And you just gave them a cup of black coffee and a cigarette and said, talk. Like, you just don't want to give them that vibe. So one of the things that's really important is to make it a conversation, right? Listen skillfully. Based on what they are saying, what is your next question or comment, or what is the next thing that you want to say based on what they're saying? And listening is not something that comes very naturally to us sales folk. Also, being quiet is not something that comes very naturally. So those were 2 things that I really needed to improve on in my early tenure. And so I would say my conversations always open up with some kind of probing and building into that, figuring out what the need is to uncover. Because who am I to speak to anything without first fully understanding what is going on? And then to get the sale, I mean, we follow the professional selling skill. So it's, probing, uncovering, supporting, and then closing. And oftentimes I always kind of go in with what I want to uncover, knowing what I want to close. So my close is always different depending on the clinic, on where I'm at in the relationship with them. Is this my first ever conversation I'm having with these folks, or am I just trying to build my business within that? So they may have given me a little bit of business here and there, and now I want to go deeper and I want to understand what's preventing you from, referring more often. So it really depends on where I'm at in that relationship.
I'm going to just comment on the referring part there. I think that's one of the most undervalued, underlooked things of a good sales or service conversation is the referrals that come from it. It's one place where people just don't ask that question and just go around it, or they're not comfortable. But if you're one of those people that's going to work hard and figure all the stuff out and then have good conversations, you owe it to yourself at the end of that to ask for referrals and ask for more business, because you've done all the work. Now you got to get all the benefits of it.
And to build on that, Jacob, one of the things that I've actually really liked doing that has proved huge for my business, which is getting referrals throughout the conversation, not just at the end. So actually what I've been doing is literally putting around sticky notes to these folks and say, if while I'm talking, you think of somebody who you think may benefit, I want you to write down their last name and your email address. And that way you're not, where they're standing. You can see if they're writing down names or not. And then by the time you get to the end, it's not like that super awkward, hey, you want to throw me some referrals or give me some business? It's like throughout the conversation, you have been collecting those referrals. And then by the end, it's not that really awkward close where like your prospect knows it's coming, and it's just cringy. Or at least I don't think all closes are like that. If you're a skillful salesperson, it doesn't have to be that way. But that has been one thing that's been really like, don't be afraid to, ask for business throughout. That's been huge in my line of work. That has been huge.
Sure. Thank you for sharing.
One of the challenges that we have when we're thinking about what am I going to say next? What questions am I going to ask? Because I do remember a time when my mentor, he said, ask questions. And I hadn't prepared, and I also couldn't think of any. Like what? Because I hadn't really gone through the dance of these different conversations. So clarifiers are great to help you single in on what they're saying. And one of my favorite clarifiers is simply, and I think it comes from the fact that I'm the child of mental health professionals. My father, a psychiatrist, my mother, a psychologist, is what do you mean by that? That is one of the best open-ended clarifiers. What do you mean by that? Or, and this gets into, and we will do an episode for sure on active listening, but active listening as a huge part of probing is so important. But what do you mean by that? Or they say something like, our clinic has, well, what is an example of something that they say? Like you come in with your devices and they say what?
Are you asking like, what is an objection or?
Yes. Yeah,
okay.
Let's go at objections.
So sometimes objections, actually, I would say in my experience, a lot of times objections come as statements. So oftentimes I notice that they go, oh yeah, I refer for very end stage disease state. That would just be an example. But my goal is to get them to recognize that this is a chronic and progressive disease, and we want to look at being preventative, right? Ultimately expanding their understanding of who or what the patient type is that we can help.
So what is a statement that you would hear them make?
I refer for stage 3, and I want them to refer at stage 1 or 2.
And then what do you usually say when they say that?
I would say, okay, well, what are some of the signs and symptoms that you look for? And then they say, oh, well, I look for X, Y, and Z. And then I would say, okay, do you ever look for, and then I list some symptoms that may be in the earlier stages.
Okay.
And then they may say no, most likely, if they're only referring later stage. And I would say, why is that? And that's been successful. And oftentimes when I tell, then I'll kind of dive into a little bit of education about, you know, here's a study, or here's something to support what I've been saying. Does this surprise you? Trying to figure out, you know, where they stand.
So you're leading them to stage 1 and 2, right? Like by asking a lead, an open-ended lead, like, well, what about stage 1 and 2?
Yeah.
And you're helping them to articulate what their needs are by asking clarifying questions.
Absolutely.
And confirming what you understand. It sounds to me too, like what you do is you draw on your conversations that you've had with other medical providers, and that is creating value. Like, well, here's what so-and-so's doing.
Yeah.
Because they don't know.
Yeah. And that's been huge. And it also adds some credibility. Well, in my other clinics, this is what we're looking for. And one of the things that I've been doing is trying to implement some kind of a template that they use, you know, or something that they can do, a set list of questions that they can be asking their patients. And that has been huge. In my other clinic, we've implemented a template. How do you feel about that? Or what do you think about that? Something along those lines.
And you're going in scrubs to these appointments?
Yes.
Interesting.
It's bold. It's a bold move. I think the idea is that we don't want to come in dressed like professionals. We want to come in dressed like how they're dressed, and give them this concept that we are here to be an extension of their business, that we are a part of their business. So if I come in, you know, looking super fly in my lady tie, then they're going to go, okay, this girl is like so out to lunch. She doesn't know what we do, what our patient type is. She's coming in trying to look good and impress us. Whereas that is not, you know, I literally walk in scrubs and sit down. Like, I don't like to stand when I'm presenting if everybody else is sitting. I sit down with them and have a conversation, right? And that seems to be effective.
But this is like the ultimate fake it till you make it, right? Like, you're not someone who works in scrubs, you're sales. So
right. And I have no medical, like, I'm not a nurse or a doctor. And it's hilarious because I always get that question. And actually, Ivan, I think I would love some tips here, because they always ask me, what's your medical background? Are you a nurse? I always get that. Are you a nurse? Which is a compliment, because obviously I'm coming across like I have a medical background, which is ideal. But I don't want to be like, no, I'm just a peasant. Like, I have a 4-year bachelor degree. I really have no business being here right now or telling you how to run your practice, but that's exactly what I'm doing. It's bold. So Ivan, I would love to know, like, how would you answer a question that kind of pinholes you into a corner like that, you know?
I was going to ask you, but yeah, we can think that through. So how often do they ask that?
Gosh, I would say a lot. And usually the form of the question is, so are you a nurse? And I'm like, nope.
No, but I play one on TV.
Yeah, right.
I mean, it could be humor. That could be the way. I think I would go with, I mean, you're in the medical field, right? Because you're doing sales in the medical field. And so so they ask, are you a nurse? What's your background? And, you know, it's something like, yeah, for the last year or so, I've been in the medical field. Oh, well, what do you do?
Medical sales.
You know,
how long have you been there?
Are you asking me that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I am a seasoned veteran with about 8 months. So again, ready to retire, got that 401k built out. I pretty much know everything there is to know about medical device sales.
You could round that up to a year.
I'm going going to go ahead and call it a year. Thanks.
There you go.
You can also answer the question as a way to state your benefits of what you're doing. So they say, oh, what part of the field are you in? Well, I mean, the part of the field that I'm passionate about is helping clinics like yourself improve their bottom line results and serve the patients better. And so, so my clinical background is really on the job. So just something like, and you skate over it. It's on the job. It's really being in the trenches, being alongside of you.
Yeah.
Well, what qualifies you? What qualifies you to do this? Could be their follow-up question.
Yeah. And they don't usually say it like that, but they do, you can tell sometimes, and sometimes they won't say anything at all, but you can see them checking out or disqualifying you. Especially in my early tenure, I noticed this a lot because I really didn't know what I was talking about. And now that I've had, my company has given me such a plethora of training to the point where typically now in just our conversation, I know enough about the disease state. I can speak to very specific clinical facets of what they do. But oftentimes they won't say what qualifies you, but you can just see it on their face or see them check out or, so I think at that point, that's when you want to either re-engage them if it's a one-on-one, two-on-two, but oftentimes I notice this in big presentations. Sometimes I'm presenting to 15, 20, doctors. And when you see one doctor check out, but the rest are engaged, that's kind of where you have to figure out, okay, what should I let this one go and maybe come back on a one-on-one meeting later, which is usually what I do. Because if everybody else is engaged, then why don't I focus on who is here now?
I like the word plethora that you used. And as soon as you said that word, I thought that's your answer. When they say, what kind of background do you have? I have a plethora of training to help clinics like yours.
I think that's great.
Well, you said it. I just let you know.
Thank you.
I'm going to jump in here and I'm just going to say that I bet you were getting a lot more of those questions earlier on in your career than you are now. Mm-hmm. And I think that's because of, you changed your process. I think that's the first thing is just making sure I don't ever put someone in that position where they're going to ask or question my, training or skills. Because if they're asking that, then you're not hitting something that they're looking for early on. And that just could be the way you introduce yourself, the way you phrase things, or whatever questions you may or may not be asking. So I'm not surprised that you're getting that answer or that question a lot less now, as opposed to the beginning. That's very natural, very normal. And
speaking their language is huge. So knowing the clinical terms, right? And for people in other fields, whoever your prospect may be, understanding what it is that they do day in and day out, figuring out what those words are and then using them, right? It's really not anything too crazy, but no matter who your prospect is, they are in a very, specific field of work, and you want to figure out what their lingo is and then how you can incorporate that naturally just into your conversation. And so that's been big. And Jacob, to build off what you were saying, I've changed everything about my sales approach from my first conversation with Ivan, where I literally just started presenting this thing to him because I didn't know what probing even was, to where I'm at today. Everything has changed. And I think as a salesperson, that is huge. That is so important. Take the advice of your colleagues, take the advice of people who have been in the field way longer than yourself, and be willing to throw out what's not working, right? Humble yourself. Recognize that at the end of the day, you just want to be successful and you don't really know how to do that. And so you got to be open and willing to take those suggestions, and your business will reflect your ability to take suggestions. So
Good stuff.
What occurs to me, Jules, is that you have a lot of confidence now.
Thank you. Faking
Yeah.
it till I make it.
that you've learned the lingo, the vernacular, you have had success, and that breeds success.
Yeah, part of that too is focusing on the common goal, and knowing that at the end of the day, I'm in sales, but really I like to think of myself as like a helper, as somebody who is here to help your patients and help you. And so the more servicey I can appear, the less salesy I have to be. And that's been huge. That is when I don't like to feel like I'm selling. And in my most successful in-services is what they're called. It's just a presentation to a bunch of people. In my most successful in-services, I have conveyed myself as a service, right? And a part of my service is to serve you and serve your patients. And then they don't really feel like, they know you're a rep, but they all of a sudden they feel like you're here to help, which at the end of the day, that is what I'm here to do, right? I didn't get into this line of work because I'm a sleazy salesman. I care about people and I want to help people. And the disease state that I treat is very underdiagnosed, and it's, people suffer, and I want to help with that. So.
That's great.
It's good stuff.
That's really great. Yeah, it comes across, your confidence, your caring, that really comes across.
Thank you, Dr. Farber.
Right.
That's a good name.
Yeah. See, Mr. doesn't flow as much as Doctor.
Doctor.
Many of my clients call me Doctor, actually. So, well, I think that's a good spot to kind of wrap up. Jacob, anything else that you want to interject?
We're just going to thank our sponsors one more time. As always, 503 Building, the book Conversations by Ivan Farber, always a great read. And Imago Ansa. Thank you guys for supporting the podcast. Thank you to our special guest for being on the podcast. And Ivan, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Jules and Jacob, it's been a pleasure speaking with you today. And thank you to all our listeners for having another conversation about conversations with us. Take care.